My wife has become distant and mysterious since a new boss joined her workplace. I think she is cheating on me. I am 32 years old and have been with my wife, 28, for 7 years. At first, we were happy. She was my soulmate and I hers. We shared similar interests in sports, entertainment, social issues, etc. We will talk about these later. We have been happy for many years, however. Things started to change when my wife became more and more distant, even cold. Now, let me give you some insight. We've been together for 7 years. For 5 years, as I said, we were happy. I felt like I was her world and she was mine. We hung out with friends, and I saw her always smiling at me. She took care of me when we were talking to friends, just like I took care of her. She was there for me when I needed her. She was my rock, my best friend, my only friend. We did a lot together, like hiking, camping, and going to the safari. We had the same interests, went to football matches, we loved each other. I never wanted her to change. When I first met her, she was a beautiful brunette with curly hair, a charming smile, and a great personality. She was always nice to me and made me feel special. I never felt inadequate or insecure. I'll continue later. For more than 5 years, everything was fine. But things started to change when her new boss started working. I'll call him Maru's 30M. At first, she would come home talking about Maris, saying that she was interesting and made people feel good. Of course, at first I was a little surprised because she usually came home and asked about my day and her day, but she immediately talked about Maris. However, at the time I took it as a problem with her new workmate. She had seen the same faces for years, so when Maris appeared, it was refreshing. Weeks passed, and my wife seemed even more distant and mysterious. She went out to work at night, which didn't bother me because she used to go out a lot, but we were supposed to go for a drink at a mutual friend's house. He had been in a bad way lately because he had been diagnosed with a serious illness. As I said, my wife is a very understanding and supportive person. So when we learned that our friend Daniel 32M, we didn't hesitate to go over and show our support. I went over that evening, and my wife got off work late. I called her a few times that evening, but no one answered. I sent her a text message and waited a long time for a reply. I decided to go to Daniel's house myself. Daniel and I talked about how he's been adjusting and coping over this time. I felt so bad for Daniel. He's a good person, but something so cruel has happened to him. When I got home, I felt so angry. My wife hadn't come home yet, and there were no missed calls or text messages. This was serious. I couldn't believe it, and I started to worry if she had been in a car accident. So I called her colleague, Jane 28F. I talked to Jane and asked her if my wife Kelly had gone out with her. Jane said she had gone out, but Jane had already returned home, and she and Maru were the only ones at home. I was very angry. We had known Daniel for many years, and she had missed the opportunity to meet our friend for the sake of a man she had just met. I kept telling myself that this was an explanation, and I waited until she returned home. She returned home and saw me in the living room watching her. "What's wrong? Is everything okay?" I looked at her with interest and told Daniel that she looked depressed. "I'm sorry, I forgot. I went out with friends from work and lost track of time." She seemed sincere, and she and Daniel were good friends, so maybe she really had forgotten. I asked her a question. "Who went out with you?" She answered, the usual, Jane, Sophie, and Etienne. I replied, "Not Maris. Oh yes, he was there." I tried to remember what Jane had said. "Did everyone stay out until the end?" She answered, "Yes, it was a wonderful evening." The next day I was angry. I didn't say anything to my wife, but she had never lied to me before, and she had never let anyone down. I couldn't understand why she would abandon our sick friend for a man she had just met. Over the next few days, my wife became increasingly distant. She would come home and be cold to me. I still thought it was due to work stress. But when she came home, she was always on the phone. I asked her, "Who are you always texting?" She said it was just a work friend. I asked her, "Is it Maru?" She said no. But if it really is him, what's the problem? I've never seen my wife defend herself like this before, but I told her the truth. I replied, "Because you're always going on and on about him. He hasn't even been working with you for a month, and you already seem to be idolizing him. You talk about him with a gleam in your eye, and you've forgotten about Daniel." "I guessed right," she replied. "No, I don't idolize him. He's a nice guy but just a friend. I've already apologized to Daniel, but that's not enough. I waited until she fell asleep and checked her phone, and was surprised to find that it was full of text messages between them. I took screenshots of the conversations and saved them for future reference. A week passed, and it continued late-night lack of affection. I confided my concerns to a friend, who said I might be overreacting. Try doing something new, like surprising her with a dinner. I liked the idea, so I texted my wife to ask if she was busy after work. She replied that she wasn't. This seemed like a good text conversation to start, so I made dinner, bought a nice bottle of wine and flowers. She came home looking sad. She said she was really sorry, but a friend of a colleague was organizing a surprise birthday party for a colleague, and that night was the only time they had available. I shook my head in frustration and anger, and she really left right away, driving off. This was after months of suspicion, and I needed proof. I know you're all reading this and saying to yourselves, "Friend, couldn't you see the signs?" I could have, but I hoped I was wrong, that it was a nightmare. The truth is I was afraid to know the truth, but I had to do it. I needed proof, so I'm not proud of this. I installed a tracker in her car. I pretended to work late so she wouldn't see me when she got home. She did get home. I watched from a distance as she drove off again. I followed her, and she drove further and further away, eventually pulling into a secluded corner parking lot. She waited until another car pulled up next to her. It was him. She got out and got into his car. It was obvious what they were doing. I recorded the moment she got into the car as evidence to accuse her later. The next few days, she acted like everything was normal. I know she doesn't know I know, but she acted as usual, even shaking my hand at breakfast. She went to work, and I was off that day, so I decided to use my laptop to check for anything suspicious. There was nothing, but as I was going through her drawers, not that I'm proud of this, I saw an iPad at the bottom of her drawer that wasn't mine, so I assumed my wife had bought it for me. Luckily, it didn't need a password. I don't know if she forgot to lock it, but I was lucky and I got in. What really hurts me now is that I checked the text conversations on the iPad, but there was nothing. However, what I was about to see I will never forget. There was a folder with a bunch of photos of my wife posing sale for him, and there were also a lot of emails, but there was more. There were videos. I knew I shouldn't watch them, but I did anyway. In the video, Jan and Marju slept with my wife, and my wife enjoyed it, but there was also a video of my wife sleeping with another woman and another man, but the other man made me feel sick. He was a paranoid man with certain despicable groups. As I said, he was a despicable man, and it seems that Maris agreed with him, which was fitting. I couldn't believe that my wife was with a man who held paranoid views. This woman hated any form of bigotry as much as I did, so why was she doing it? What did she see in him? Seeing her fully complicit made me truly understand in marriage. We always talked about fantasies, but never as a man. We always talked about fantasies, but never because it was the most important. I wanted her to leave, just didn't know why she would do it. I didn't know why she rejected me on the path of fantasy. If I could, what made him so special? Why did she like a man I thought she despised because of what he represented? In any case, I talked about everything with Daniel. He is a great man and friend, and he couldn't believe I was talking about my wife. He felt disgusted with her, but noticed her change. I told him I wanted a divorce from her, and he understood me. He said I already had enough reasons to support me. He told me that confronting her in front of him was pointless because she had already made up her mind. He said I needed to start over and find a real self, not marry an illusory woman like me. Daniel hates despicable racists, and he was shocked that my wife did this. Daniel knew my wife better than I did. After Daniel, I felt like I was in control for months, when in fact she was. I was afraid to find out the truth because I was afraid of the outcome. I didn't know whether to leave her or try to save our marriage, but after watching the video, the pictures and the text, I knew exactly what I had to do. I went to the lawyer and filed for divorce. I was fed up. My wife still acted normal, kept calling all the time and going out late a lot. I assumed with him. I didn't care. I had to wait 3 weeks for the papers. I got them and decided to move out. Luckily, we rented our place and the lease ran for another 3 months expired. I was prepared to pay until then. Anyway, I wanted to move out, so that day came. She went to work. I made up an excuse that I had to go. Later, to make up for the lack of manpower, she shrugged and said okay. No goodbyes, no hugs, no kisses. It's been like that for months, and I'm used to it. She left and I packed my essentials. I put the divorce papers and my wedding ring on the kitchen table, and that was it. I moved in with Adam, a university friend of mine who lives in another city. I was grateful, but even more grateful that it was far away from her and away from our social circle. I didn't want anything to do with anything. I told my parents what had happened. They were shocked, but completely understood. I obviously didn't tell them every little detail. There was no need to. The only thing on my mind at the moment was that I was free, and I thought my wife would agree, because it was obvious that Maris was the one she wanted. I hoped we could get divorced as soon as possible. That night, my phone was blowing up with calls from my wife. I was surprised because I really thought this was what she wanted too. But it seems I was dead wrong. I didn't speak to my wife, I wasn't interested. I read her messages, all apologizing, saying she loved me, could we talk, etc. It went on for hours. I blocked her number, deleted all my social media accounts. I spoke to my lawyer about the divorce, but my wife hasn't signed anything yet. She did contact me by email. I wanted to keep some sort of contact with her because I still wanted a divorce. She emailed me again, saying she was sorry and that we needed to talk. I replied that there was no need, that I just wanted a divorce. She replied that she didn't want a divorce, that I was the only person she loved and that Maru was nothing. That was interesting because I had never told her the reason I left, but she obviously knew. Her guilt and her pleas for forgiveness satisfied me. I spoke to Adam and he said I can stay as long as I want. I am grateful to him, but he did say that I will eventually have to see her. He said I left without an answer. No matter how hard you try, eventually you need to hear the answer from within. I disagree with Adam. Why should I speak to her? Why has she not cared about how I feel for months? She doesn't care about me, only her sick friend Daniel. She doesn't care. Why should I speak to her? I know deep down I'm stubborn and angry because my wife tried to make peace and I thought she would sign and move on with him. This confused me, and now it's even more confusing because my wife wants to meet. I have a great therapist and I told him about the affair, the photos and videos, and I mentioned that my wife wants to meet before she signs. The therapist said bluntly that when I left without telling her the reason, deep down you hoped that she would beg you, that you hoped she would worry about you. You kept telling yourself that she wouldn't care, but deep down, you hoped that she cared about you and that she was suffering as much as you were. However, meeting with her would weaken your control. She is right. She also said that if you decide to meet, you must ask the difficult questions, even if you don't like the answers, because you do have questions. You are not moving forward at all, you are avoiding it because you are afraid that the past 7 years have been a lie. As I said, this was 2 days ago. My wife really has to meet and convince her, otherwise she won't sign. I have talked about this with my parents and close friends, and my father said that you can force her to sign, but it may take a few months, but if she is willing, there is no guarantee that you will talk to her and she will sign, so it is still worth it. Adam agreed. I decided to meet with my wife, although to say that I was nervous is an understatement. How should I handle this? What should I ask? Should I be frank or cautious? Any help and advice would be greatly appreciated. Update 1. I'm sorry that my updates have been longer than I had intended, as I had planned to post the next day, but unfortunately circumstances have changed. However, before I post, I would like to thank everyone who has posted feedback. I have read every piece of feedback carefully and have taken on board everyone's suggestions. I'm very grateful, to be honest. I would also like to point out a few things regarding my previous posts. A lot has happened since I first posted. I moved back in with Adam. It was great living with him, but I eventually had to go back. My soon-to-be ex was still living in our house, so I rented an apartment outside of town. I told my wife I was coming back, and she was happy, but I didn't explicitly tell her I would be living with her. She understood, and despite her attempts to find out the specifics of our arrangement, like that we would sleep in separate rooms, I didn't want that. I also said that I would not tell her where I was staying, and that she would still want to see us, despite her attempts to find out. We arranged a time and place which was a neutral place near the beach, so to speak, where there were people but not too many in case there was an argument, which was obviously something I did not want. I wanted to meet her outside and only her. I know some people in the comments have said to bring a friend, but I don't think that's necessary, but I do appreciate the suggestion. I do agree that I will definitely record the conversation before the meeting. I emailed my soon-to-be ex and set some ground rules. If she doesn't follow them, there is no chance of reconciliation. The rules are simple: answer each question only once, answer honestly, don't change the subject with things like "that's just the way it is" or "I'm not sure." If she gets angry and leaves without answering each question, it's over, no chance of reconciliation. 3 answers, even if you think the answer will hurt me. For if you don't want to make up, then don't be late. So we arrived in time. Now all we have to do is wait. The next day I came home, and the other friends treated me like they had treated Daniel. Although I understood, and I was very grateful for their hugs and support, it seemed that our breakup had inevitably spread. Although I didn't understand how they knew, I had only told a few people, but my wife inevitably told her family and friends. Of course the domino occurred, but they obviously didn't know all the details. They didn't know about the texts, pictures, and videos. Even my wife didn't know I had them. She thought I left because she spent too much time with Maris. She didn't know about everything I had. She thought spending time with Maris' husband upset her, and she broke up with him because of it. I told my therapist about the meet, and she said I should ask some questions so she can better understand what's going on. I'll explain later. Today is meet day. I was nervous before, but boy, I'm about to crack. Not because I want her back, but seeing her and then seeing her means seeing him in my head, and then I lose focus and control. I drove to the beach really early. I observed my surroundings, and in retrospect, it was the perfect day. The sun was out, people were exercising. I picked a nice spot, and then suddenly I turned around and saw my soon-to-be ex-wife walking towards me. She was smiling, looking well, slightly tired and nervous, but not sympathetic. She approaches and tries to hug me, which I reject by holding out my hand. She looks at me and I understand what she means. We sit down and she tries to start small talk, but I'm not interested. I turn on the voice recorder on my phone and begin to ask, "When did you first kiss him?" "Friday." Me. "When did you first sleep with him?" "Friday." "Same day." Me. "Where was she?" "His place." Me. "Did you do it in my bed?" Her. "Does it matter?" I looked at her and said, "About the emails. Answer everything I say." Her. "Yes." She started to cry. Me. "She said it was basically a few times. I wasn't home. Our neighbors saw him but rightly assumed he was a colleague. They didn't care about it." Her. "She's already apologized and keeps apologized." But I held up my hand to stop her. I asked other questions. "I asked you about me and your marriage." She answered yes, but it was vague at the time. Now my therapist asked me to ask her a specific question, and this is it. I asked, "When you first met, when did Maris start talking about me?" She asked, "What do you mean?" I asked, "It's simple, when you were chatting, what did he ask you about me?" He wanted to know how long we had been married, whether we were happy, etc. She paused for a moment and said, "Yes, he did ask us about our marriage and whether we were happy." "Why do you find that strange? You met someone you hardly knew and he asked personal questions about our marriage," she replied. "No, I think he was just curious. I don't find that strange." After asking a few insignificant questions, I decided to ask something more important. I decided to ask her about the videos and pictures, but I did it in a lukewarm way. I mentioned the racist attack that had happened at a local shop in our neighborhood, so I toned it down and turned it into this. I did. "Have you heard about the incident last Thursday?" She, "What incident?" Me, "Those racists who attacked the shopkeeper and vandalized his shop. They had sprayed hate graffiti all over before." She, "That's terrible." Me, "Yes, I can't stand racists. Can you?" She looked at me with a confused expression. She didn't say anything, and then she seemed to fully understand what I meant. She knew that I knew about the pictures and videos. She started crying again, and it lasted about 5 minutes. I held her and asked her why she was close to such a person. She cried and reddened, trying to sort herself out. "It's not what it seems, and it's not what you think." And me, what the hell was I thinking? What did this man do to make you disrespect your grandfathers who didn't respect you in World War II or abandon your friends and treat me like garbage? She was shaking. She looked at me with tears in her eyes, but answered anyway. He is the new boss in our department. He is frank and funny. He makes a lot of people feel good. A lot of women like him. Even after the beginning, he also has. But when he started to be interested in me, I felt that he chose me. Me, what does this mean? I need to be honest. When we started talking, he made it clear that he was only interested in me. I interrupted him and said, a few days later, yes, that's what I want to say. He has a way of making someone feel happy immediately, and even when I see him looking at me across the office, I feel very happy. When he said to me that you are the only interesting person here, I felt good. As I said, I feel that he chose me. I know it's pathetic, I'm pathetic and weak, but you have to understand. When he first arrived in the office, he was good-looking, confident, well-mannered, and there was just something about him. When he smiled, I melted. She continued, anyone in the office could have had him. All the girls wanted him. They couldn't stop talking about him. I know it sounds awful, but I never thought he would choose me. I waited, you want to be chosen. She didn't. At first it wasn't like that, I thought it was just harmless flirting. But he made it clear that he wanted more than just flirting, that was it. What was I? What was she? He was like a temptation I couldn't get away from. I know it's pathetic, but please give me a little time. He spoke to me and praised me, and I was stunned, but really flattered. My confidence rose from 60% to 10,000%. I thought, a man can have anyone, but he told me he chose me, he kept saying it was me. I don't understand. She made him feel like I was the one he was destined for. I know this isn't what you want to hear, but I'm being honest, continue. I said I couldn't deny that I was attracted to him, obviously. I understand now. I waited for you. You thought you were hiding. Yes, at first she did avoid me, but he courted me. The other girls were jealous of me, and I was excited by that. The more I looked at him, the more I liked him. I wanted her, I wanted to feel like a queen. I know you've been good to me, I'm lucky. But then Maru's treatment took it to the next level. I was excited to see the jealous women envy me. I did ask her to be honest, she continued, and it seemed to me that I thought to myself, I'm so lucky to have this man. But the longer I'm with him, the less he's like himself, but I can't stop it. I asked her what she meant, and he made his needs clear. He unconditionally understands me, but he makes me do things I don't like. Those videos and pictures were his idea. Yes, I know his friends and his ideology, but I don't want to challenge him or Maru because I don't want to upset him. He has a way of saying that if you can't make me happy, someone else will. His attitude at the time was, do you know how lucky you are? I panicked, I did everything I could to make him happy. I just wanted to make him happy, nothing else mattered, so I did anything for him at that time. You obviously saw that I told her, of course I said it, I know, but as I said, he is someone I can't get rid of. The more I look at him, the more I want him to make me believe you are bad. He makes me believe you hold me back and disrespect me. I know it's not true, and she cried again, but that's why I did everything he told me to do. Even if he criticized you, I couldn't fight back because I was so infatuated with you, so it didn't matter if you treated me badly. Skipped dinners, skipped camping trips, really. She didn't. I'm not asking for forgiveness, I don't deserve it, because I know how I treated you, I was horrible to you, and I'll never forgive myself, but I did skip dinners and so on. I know I hurt you, but I couldn't stop. He kept telling me that I deserved better than you and that I should be treated like a queen. So the more I went to fancy restaurants, VIP theater shows, fancy jewelry, the more I hated you, but every time he did it, he always mentioned your failures, so I obviously believed it, and that's why I was cold to you. I thought you had let me down. But he didn't. I know that's not true, but at the time he was very influential and I believed everything he said. She continued, until I saw the newspaper and the ring. I suddenly realized. I know you don't believe me, but I broke up with Marju right away. I know I don't deserve praise, but I'm really ashamed of what happened. I can't imagine how you feel. I know I ignored your feelings and made you feel worthless, but I didn't realize it before. After I saw the documents, I was ashamed of myself for choosing this despicable man. I looked at her and didn't expect her to answer, but she seemed sincere. I replied, besides your affair, you know what the problem is. At first you wanted this relationship because you said he chose you, you said he was a doctor, but millions of people get off drugs, they realize they have a problem and seek help, didn't you? The only reason you were here was because I was your safety net, and now it's gone. Spouses can't say I love you when they don't feel good enough. She claims she know you don't. You did it for 11 months. You made me feel worthless because you knew I was eating, becoming more and more withdrawn, losing myself while you went out every night, to the gym, buying new clothes, becoming a completely different person. You came home and looked at me with disgust. During this time, you wouldn't let me touch you or anything. You gave me nothing. Except abuse. She abused me. Yes, you did abuse me, and maybe you think you did, but damn you did. My best friend and confidant made me hate myself. She was crying again. And it was bad. I thought about it. I didn't say it, but you can imagine that she was crying so hard and was so sorry that I forgot we were on the beach and people were looking, that I had to let her breathe. She regained her composure and continued pleading. It was he who had put harmful ideas in her head against me. I do have one more question. Do you love him? She answered, no, I don't love him. I know you won't believe me, but I really hate him. As much as I hate myself. A few hours later, she left, saying that everything was true and that I was the love of her life. I sat on the beach, thinking about the possibility that she had been groomed and conditioned. I mean, it made sense. She had completely changed after she met him. My therapist wanted to ask this question, and although she was unable to diagnose Maris, she believed that he had sociopathic tendencies, so why did he ask about our marriage? She said it was obvious that he had an agenda, asking you about your marriage so early on, and these signs indicated that he had indeed chosen your wife. He knew that your marriage was happy and stable, so he had a new challenge, and that challenge was to cause a breakup and destroy the lives of sociopaths. Maris would never be with a single girl because there is no challenge, but with my wife, he not only controls her, but also me, her friends and family. He has turned her into everything your wife is against and made sure she did it. He has turned you into a frustrated loner. She continues to do this, which is why you and your wife never confronted her after the text messages and videos. You simply had no confidence. This is what he and your wife did. He manipulated everything, but my wife willingly cooperated. Sociopaths like to manipulate and control narratives. When you followed your wife to the parking lot, he probably knew you would. If you confronted them there, your wife would probably have sided with him, so he would have won. People with sociopathic tendencies have no empathy. They are driven by the desire to see others suffer. It fits that my wife is a victim of a sociopath, but there is a part of me that doesn't care. Okay, I sometimes care very much about who this person is. I keep telling myself that I have never met a man so authoritative and yet ruining people's lives. But deep down, he is a boss, makes a decent living. He is 30 but looks 21, has a great body, is confident and turns women's heads. But maybe my soon-to-be ex-wife was right. She broke up with him when I left that day, because after I left, the neighbor told me that Magus had been coming to my house a lot, asking to talk to my soon-to-be ex-wife. My wife said he apparently did this many times. When we met, he acted like an abusive husband. My therapist said sociopaths have trouble accepting rejection, especially when they can't control it. My wife dumped him and he became erratic. Why did my therapist say this is simple? Because your wife chose you over him. Fortunately, he manipulated her for less than a year, and she still had the strength to end the relationship, which undoubtedly disrupted his plans. Update. I contacted Human Resources to ask about my wife and him, and it turned out that other people had contacted them too. It seems the word had gotten around. He left shortly after I spoke to my wife. I don't know where he went and I don't care. Apparently, people were unhappy with her and her behavior, especially her parents. She is living at her parents' house and is preparing to move out. She is receiving help from a psychologist, although she does need it. I am still talking to her family and our friends, who are trying to get me to meet with my soon-to-be ex-wife, but it is impossible. She needs to focus on getting better, and the divorce will be finalized in a few weeks. I know some people say she won't sign the papers after the meeting, but I have to go. I have to know why she did this. I have to know if I feel better. Yes, my wife is honest, and I think that makes sense. I'm getting a divorce soon, and I asked her if there was any chance of a final reconciliation. I have to admit that even if she was the victim of a master manipulator, I considered reconciling with her. If I forgave her, I would only think of him and how much worse I am compared to him. I would feel like a subpar product, no matter how much she reassured me that this was not the case. I have always been her confidant, even after she said that. I guess the story is telling us that cheating is obviously wrong, that it affects and hurts the partner, and that the cheaters are very selfish and they only admit it when they get caught or put the divorce papers on the kitchen table. I certainly will not get married again. The hurt from the affair has hit me hard. Although I have started going to the gym again, going hiking with friends and camping with friends, I have been trying to stay active and look forward. I do hate it. Hate 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 I hate it. Moving thousands of miles away, although I understand, but my work and social circles have always been good to me, and I don't want to lose it all. If I move completely, I will feel like they want me to do so, and I refuse to be a victim. My therapist says that healing takes time and patience. Well, that's all the advice I've taken, and I'm very grateful for it. Update 3. I know it's been a while since I last posted, and I want to thank everyone for reaching out. I'm sorry I haven't been able to respond to everyone in a timely manner. Life has been crazy lately, and I hope you understand. A lot has happened, and I should probably start by giving you an update. I want to clarify 2 things. First, I've noticed in the comments that some people are saying my story is fake, and I don't think words prove anything. I knew my wife was up to something, and my friend said it might not be a big deal, and he said that because he and the others felt that digital flirting was not considered cheating. I believed him, and I didn't want to face what was happening. The reason I wanted feedback on meeting my wife was entirely because I wanted to make sure I was doing the right thing. As I said, I have already met my wife, but I wanted others in my social circle to think I was doing the right thing too. Sorry, I should have made this clearer. As I said before, the story is not over for me, but I would like to tell you how it ends. Here is what happened. After I met my wife on the beach, my mind was in a complete mess. As I said before, my wife is still trying to talk to me, but I still can't deal with what happened. I'm still talking to my therapist, but my wife is receiving psychological treatment in a private hospital funded by her parents. I found out about this because I saw my wife's parents while I was hiking alone. I was walking across a shallow stream when I heard someone shouting my name. It was her parents. I was a little worried about meeting them, especially after seeing their daughter on the beach. I wondered what my wife had told them. Had she lied? Had she said anything bad about me? And so on. It turned out that she hadn't said anything. Her parents came over, her mother gave me a hug, and her father shook my hand. They both apologized for what had happened, but I told them they had nothing to apologize for. My wife's mother suggested we find a bench and sit down to talk. I agreed. Mother. She began by telling me that my wife had been seeing a psychologist. I had known my wife's parents for many years, and they had never lied to me. I had always found them to be very honest. Now, they told me their side of what had happened with Maru. It turned out that not only had my wife been completely honest with me, but also with her parents. Before Maru, my wife liked to paint, and she inherited her talent for it from her mother. Her mother had a painting social group with other people, and my wife really enjoyed it. They painted together for several years, and it made my wife happy. However, after she met Maru, she stopped going. When my wife's mother called her, she didn't even give any reason. She was rude to her mother, and even swore. My wife never swore, but this time she did. She would say things like, "I don't care about this group, it's pathetic, just like you." My wife's parents said that this was not an isolated incident at all, and that they tried to talk to her about changing her behavior, but all they got was abuse. At the time, they thought it was because of me, that there was a problem between us, and they never even thought it was because of the affair. It wasn't until after I left that my wife called her parents and everything made sense. After I went to Adams, my wife went to her parents and told them everything, about the affair, what she had done, what Magus had made her do, etc. It made sense, but they were also disgusted. Her father pursued my wife so aggressively that she was terrified when she heard her daughter tell the story. It didn't make sense at all, because this was their daughter, not someone who would cheat, lie, or abuse people. But it made me go back to the therapist who believed that my wife was being groomed by a sociopath. My wife is the victim of a psychopath. Therapist: no, not a psychopath, a sociopath. What's the difference? Until now, I was ashamed to admit that I knew nothing about it. Therapist: psychopaths change their personality to fit in with their social circle. For example, if they meet a happy extrovert, they become that person. Sociopaths don't change. They make sure that the people closest to them change, and they mold that person into a negative and despicable person. Me: okay, that does make sense. Therapist: obviously, Maju did this to your wife. He made her speak to her parents in a disrespectful manner. He spoke to his parents disrespectfully, and he deliberately chose people who defended the Nazis to record the video. Me: how can one person control another? Are you saying that my wife is the victim? Therapist: yes, I know it sounds ridiculous, but people with sociopathic tendencies are very influential and, more importantly, extremely controlling. Back to my wife's parents. The mother said she was seeing a psychologist. Her parents seemed a little nervous but also relieved that their daughter was seeking help. A few weeks later, over the past few weeks, my wife's mother has contacted me and we have spoken regularly. She said she agreed and wanted me to talk to her and consult her about her therapy sessions. Basically, my wife wanted me to talk to her mother and her psychiatrist about what was going on. I asked myself whether I should do this. We agreed that after the meeting my wife would sign a document, but I felt a little unsure. In any case, we agreed that after a few weeks of therapy, the psychologist would speak to my wife. Mother-in-law waited patiently outside, a bit like my therapist. She spoke bluntly but with an Irish accent. The psychologist said to us both, "Your daughter suffers from post-traumatic stress disorder. Her relationship with Maru was abusive, grooming, and controlling. It affected her from the beginning of her relationship with Maru. She met me in the first week of her relationship with Maris. For me, she was hardly someone who fought for me." I suddenly said rudely, "My wife's mother is looking at me sternly. Shut up and let her finish," the psychologist said. As I said, Maris had all the qualities of the perfect person, and we all have an image of such a person in our minds. When Maris started working at your wife's place of work, he was perfect, not only in your wife's eyes, but also in the eyes of others. I know it's hard. She looks at me, "But your wife is honest. This perfect man chose her. I'm fine, so she forgot she was married." Psychologist: she raises her hand. "I'm not saying what she did was right. Yes, she did find him attractive, but his personality is not good at manipulation. He treated her kindly for less than a year and made her think he was perfect. Looking at the two of us, you're not your wife. She was so conditioned that she started to believe it. That's why she mentally abused you again. Looking at the two of us, that's him." After the conversation, we saw my wife in the hall. She looked up at the two of us and smiled. She looked at us shyly. I wanted to hate her, to make her suffer, to take revenge, but those emotions didn't come. Time passed and I had to do something. I did it last year and I will do it every year. I went where I needed to go, looked around, and started to feel emotional. Daniel's grave. Daniel had died not long ago, and at the funeral I saw that my wife was not doing well. As I said before, my wife and Daniel had known each other since they were old enough to understand. I remember what Daniel said to my wife after the matter became public. My wife apologized for everything, and Daniel forgave her at the grave. I didn't say anything. I just sat there until I saw my wife sitting next to me. I looked at her and she looked at me and cried. I've thought countless times about avoiding her and being cold towards her. But I know that today is not about us. It's about Daniel. So for the first time in a long time, I embraced my wife. Time passed and I'm still seeing a psychologist, and my wife is still seeing a psychologist. I'm sitting in a coffee shop, looking at the people outside. They look so happy. It makes me smile. "Here's your cranberry juice," my wife said, sitting across from me. We've been talking for weeks now. Nothing romantic, just trying to get to know her again. We met again because my wife wanted to tell me something, and we agreed to meet by the lake. Now I want to know what the cranberry juice is. Is everything okay? I arrived first, and she was there within 5 minutes. I immediately asked her if everything was okay. She smiled and said everything was fine. She handed me a box. "What's in it?" I said, "Open it and see." She smiled and opened it. Inside was the family crest. I looked at her and said, "Happy anniversary." she said that after all this time. She remembered that it was important to her to have heirlooms, but that wasn't all. She gave me another box, and when I opened it, I found a photo of us, Daniel, our family, and our happy times. I almost broke down. She put her hand on my shoulder and said, "This isn't a weak attempt to win you back. I bought these because I know they're important to you, and that makes them important to me, too. I know you've been hurt a lot, but I want you to know that I love you, I always have, I always will, and it's important to me." I watched her as she walked away, overwhelmed, but still smiling. She always had a sweet smile. I smiled as I watched her walk away. I took a walk on the beach. The weather was nice. I bought fish and chips and sat with my wife on the rocks, looking out at the sea. We talked and talked about your big day, so it's important to me too. I know there was a lot of hurt, but I want you to know that I love you, I always have and I always will. I watched her walk away, overwhelmed, but still smiling as she always does. I watched her walk away, and I smiled too. I took a walk on the beach. The weather was nice. I bought fish and chips, and my wife and I sat on the rocks, looking out at the sea, and we talked and 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 talked 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 and talked talked and 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 talked. She continued, "I understand your suspicions, but if you no longer feel anything for her, you won't do this and you won't meet with her. The only question is, are you going to follow what you think is right or let him win?" The therapist said the same thing at the time, that the pain had been too deep for those 11 months, but people say that time heals all. This time, I felt that I had to get to know my wife again. After dinner, we walked slowly along the beach, and I did something I hadn't done in a long time. I took her hand. She cried. I stopped and looked at her for the first time in a long time. I saw my wife, not the cold, emotionless animal I had seen for the past 11 months. I saw her, the woman I loved, and I embraced my wife. Update: for I have received many DMs and messages asking me to provide updates like I used to, and I want to thank everyone who responded and expressed their concerns. But I did not realize that Reddit was such a judgmental place. Some people wanted me and my wife to receive terrible things, and I guess they didn't mean it literally. I guess my wife and I would have received terrible hints, but I do want to thank those who supported me. I received many DMs and messages, and people asked me to provide updates as before. I want to thank everyone who responded and expressed their concerns, but I didn't expect Reddit to be such a judgmental place. Some people wanted my wife and I to receive terrible things, And I guess the reason I got back with my wife is because my wife consulted, not because my wife didn't want us to do so, but because she is in the later stages of treatment, basically like the obscure metaphor in the movie, the treatment is about to end, and what's left is my wife's closer stage of treatment. As I said, the treatment is still continuing. In my previous post, many people asked about Maris, and I said that he disappeared after his affair was exposed, but then I found out that this was not the case. He did meet with my wife when she was thinking about coming back to me. Now, before anyone jumps to conclusions, I need to explain what really happened. As Maru said, he disappeared, but he still tried to call my wife, texting, FaceTime, going to her house, etc. He did it countless times, and my wife blocked him from all forms of communication. This seemed to work for a while because Maris didn't contact, and at that time my wife was trying to build bridges with her family and me. Especially one day, her phone rang, an unknown caller answered, and it was him, Maris. My wife was with her mother, her sister, and her mother's friend. When everyone realized it was him, my wife put the phone on speakerphone. She didn't leave the room. She didn't try to hide. She spoke to Maris in front of witnesses. I don't want to bore you with every detail, but the conversation went something like this. Maris wants to see my wife, and now he wants to see her again. Before you jump to conclusions, please read on. There was a reason why my wife put the phone on speakerphone. Her psychologist said that if he tried to call, she should put him on speakerphone so she would have a witness and it would help anyone who wanted to know what was said. There wasn't much said, basically Maru asking to meet. The reason my wife decided to meet was for her own reasons. She wanted to meet him not for romantic reasons but to close the chapter. My wife decided to meet at Fountain Park. The time and place were decided by her. There will be a lot of people. Besides, my wife wanted to be accompanied just in case. Maris knew me and knew what I looked like, but not her friends Bree and Tor. They would be there to support her during the Swedish tour. He looked like a typical male sweetheart, 6'4" and looked like Dolph Lundgren. He was there to make sure nothing happened to her. Now some of you may be asking, why didn't your wife tell you about the meet? At the time, the wife and mother-in-law didn't want to ruin any chances of reconciliation, because it wasn't a romantic piece of meat. How would I know? My wife recorded the conversation. Bree and Tor were also present. I also know and trust them. I won't bore you with every little detail of the meet. I obviously listened to the end, but that's the main thing. Bree and T sat on the bench next to them. The wife and Maru, hello, try to have a small talk. Wife, what do you want? What do you want, Maris? Okay, I want you to explain, wife. Explain. Maris. Yes, please tell me. After everything we've been through and everything I've done for you, you're abandoning us. Wife. It's easy because I don't love you. I never have. I'm embarrassed and ashamed of the life I've ruined for you. Maris. Don't exaggerate. I gave you a life your husband never gave you. Did he treat you well? No, no one has ever treated you like this but me. God, you sound like a child now. Wife, you have given me nothing but shame. It was never about us, it was always about my husband and my family. Marju, you know that was about you and me. Wife, you know that wasn't your fault. You were obsessed with my husband and family, wondering what my husband liked, but that wasn't the strange part. What's really bad is that you immediately say that they're wrong, that my husband is wrong with me and my family is wrong. But the truth is that you're wrong, Marju. Yes, don't be childish. I don't remember you ever objecting to anything I bought you. I remember you smiling and liking it. So thank you, wife. Thank you. What did you get from me? You disrespected my husband. You took great pleasure in hearing me say that my husband was clearly suffering. But you didn't stop there. You made me say hurtful things to my husband and family. You didn't see it at the time, but you always wanted me to report my words and actions. Wife loses her cool. Maru laughs. I should apologize for feeling sorry for your husband, because he and your family are holding you back, and that's the truth. I remember you liked the things I gave you, and you smiled and hugged me. I made you realize that your circle is just a step away. Now I'm ready to forgive you. We can really be together. Wife laughs. You were right. I did smile when I received the gift, but I never had a good feeling about you. You were very good at making me feel like you were the one for me, when in fact you were a miserable person. Why do you think I ended the relationship when I saw the documents? Because there is no competition between your husband and me. My husband is much better than you. He is a kind and sincere good person, while you are despicable. Maris, you are an ungrateful woman. Woman, you can't be serious, can you? Going out for dinner and movies on the weekends, I introduce you to real people. I'm better than you. I give you confidence and self-assurance. The way you're talking to me now is disrespectful, but you're not thinking clearly. Wife, oh, I'm thinking clearly, probably for the first time in a while. You want to get straight to the point, but the things you do are superficial. I didn't see it at the time, but what kind of man would support white nationalism? What kind of man would think that a man has the right to beat a woman for no reason, that a man should prevent a woman from attending her best friend's funeral? Wife stopped breathing. She continued, you are not a man at all, just a bully and a coward. I'm sick of myself for dating you, but I have to take the blame, and you are that mistake. You can threaten me, post videos and pictures, I don't care. You have already punished me for what you did to me. This is the last time we will meet or speak. If you try to call me or try to contact me, I will call the police. This is your final warning. Goodbye. My wife stood up to leave, and Maris tried to grab her, but T got in the way. Maris looked at us and walked away. That was the last time she and everyone else saw him. I only found out about it later. My wife and mother-in-law didn't want anything to jeopardize the possible settlement. Of course, my heart skipped a beat when I heard the news, but after hearing the story and talking to Tor, Bree and my mother-in-law, I understood why my wife had met him. Psychologist and my therapist didn't want to jeopardize a possible reconciliation. My heart skipped a beat when I heard the news, but after hearing the story from Tor, Bree and my mother-in-law, I understood why my wife had met him. My wife wanted to take back control from him, my psychologist and my therapist said. It was clear from talking to my wife, psychologist and family that she was submissive. Marju controlled everything around my wife. That meeting was the moment my wife regained control. Another question I often get is, what if another Marju appears? I have asked myself this question 100 times, but having been through all this and embarked on the path to reconciliation, I will not give up. I choose to do this because I believe my marriage is worth saving. I know I will get some abuse on Reddit, but I'm sorry, I don't care. However, I do like and appreciate constructive feedback, whether it is supportive or not, and of course it is risky, but it is worth it because I love her. For the first time in a long time, I am happy again. My wife and I are doing the things we love, and we are reconnecting with both sets of our families. It is a journey. One question I am often asked is whether your wife accepts what she did to my wife. There is a long way to go. She fully accepts responsibility for what happened. If someone said that it was completely her, she would totally disagree. She still feels guilt, shame, and disgust. She is still in therapy and has made progress, but as I said, it is a long road, a road that my wife, our family, and I are walking. I don't regret it at all. I saw some trends on Reddit about scorched earth revenge and the like. I understand, believe me, but after the anger, pain, and hatred, everyone has to make a decision. Stay or go. I decided to stay, not because I'm our but because my marriage is worth fighting for. Edit from my wife's POV. Marju was put on a pedestal at work. All the girls wanted him, so when he showed constant interest she was smitten. Now this knocked me for 10. I agree that sleeping with him in the first week questions our marriage. My wife said that she was in a whirlwind of a fantasy. At first he was a gentleman at the beginning, but he became more dominant and abusive during the affair. Of course, I'm not excusing her. She herself thinks she is responsible for everything. However, she once said, I didn't do anything wrong. It's her. She was fascinated and Maru manipulated her. Will she do it again? Honestly, no. I don't think she will make the same mistake again after this affair. My wife was a mess. Not the kind of mess that deserves sympathy, but the kind of mess that gives up. She considered suicide many times. She openly admitted what she did to me, her family, and friends. I think that reconciliation is slightly easier because of her courage to take responsibility. If she hadn't apologized, I would have easily walked away and hated her. But don't get me wrong, I did when it happened, but my family and I still love her and we have to believe she won't do it again. I also accept constructive criticism. I look forward to it, but when some people are maliciously malicious and wish horrible things to happen, it's nonsense. I hope we are one of those couples that can make it work. I'm not sure if it will work, but I have to try. I understand part of what her psychologist said. If I don't fight back, then he will win. I know some people were offended by that sentence in the previous post, but they have to understand that for him, this was a game and he clearly won, but the turning point was my wife, who ended it after he thought he had complete control over her. Since then, my wife has done her best to make amends and rebuild our trust. There were many times when I wanted to give up and give in, but my instinct told me not to give up, that I had to fight for my marriage, because if I didn't, Maris would win. I would like to say that I did it not for him, but for myself.